The Interstellar Botanical Survey Corps prided itself on precision. Every expedition launched with mathematically perfect ratios of nutrients, water reclamation systems that could purify liquid from practically anything short of molten lava, and enough compressed food blocks to sustain a crew through scenarios ranging from minor inconvenience to catastrophic but survivable. The IBSC had mapped 17,000 planets, catalogued 4 million species, and lost exactly 12 crew members in 3 centuries, a safety record that would make any insurance actuator weep with joy. Planet Verdaxis 9 was supposed to be survey mission number 4291. Routine, boring even. The kind of assignment junior researchers drew lots to avoid, because spending 3 months cataloging moss variations in a jungle that actively hated you wasn't anyone's idea of career advancement. The planet itself squatted in the Tertius Arm like a wet green nightmare, its atmosphere a soup of humidity and spores, its ecosystem a writhing mass of things that stung, bit, dissolved, or occasionally exploded when disturbed. The expedition team consisted of 7 members, which the IBSC had determined through extensive statistical analysis was the optimal number for this type of mission. Large enough for task distribution, small enough to avoid the social dynamics that turned long missions into floating therapy sessions. They had a crystalline Thexmari geologist, whose name translated roughly to structured thought regarding mineral compositions, but who went by Prax for the sake of everyone's sanity. An aquatic indoor biologist called Ulm, who required a mobility suit filled with saline solution, and complained constantly about the humidity being too dry, which nobody else understood. 2 insectoid Varin, Ticket and Chax, who served as the survey drone's operators and communicated in rapid clicks that sounded like aggressive typing. A Eularan medical officer named Vess, whose species resembled ambulatory ferns and who photosynthesized when stressed, which was often. The expedition leader, Commander Thorne, was a Quix bipedal, purple-skinned, with 4 arms, and the disposition of someone permanently disappointed by the universe's failure to meet specifications. And then there was Dietrich Kovac. Dietrich was human, which meant he occupied a peculiar niche in galactic society. Humans had joined the interstellar community roughly 2 centuries prior, arriving in ships held together with what more advanced species charitably called optimistic engineering, and what less charitable species called metal coffins with delusions of spaceworthiness. They'd proceeded to spread across available space with the persistence of weeds, taking jobs nobody else wanted, surviving in conditions that should have killed them, and generally making nuisances of themselves by refusing to die when statistics said they should. The IBSC had hired Dietrich as a field technician, which was a polite way of saying the person who fixes things when they break in stupid ways the manual didn't anticipate. He was unremarkable in appearance, brown hair going grey at the temples, average height for his species, the kind of face you'd forget 3 seconds after looking away. He performed his duties with quiet competence, never complained about the accommodations, and had an unsettling habit of humming off-key while rewiring critical systems during crisis situations. The mission had been proceeding exactly according to schedule for 42 days. They'd catalogued 1,247 plant species, discovered 3 new varieties of carnivorous moss, and lost only 2 survey drones to what Ulm had dubbed aggressive botanical objections. The crew had settled into the comfortable rhythm of routine work: wake, consume nutrition blocks, venture into the hostile jungle wearing enough protective gear to survive a chemical fire, collect samples, return, file reports, consume more nutrition blocks, sleep, repeat. Then the fungus happened. Nobody was certain which of the 17,000 spore varieties drifting through Verdaxis 9's atmosphere managed to infiltrate the climate-controlled storage bay. The investigation later suggested it was likely mycoform strain VX9447, a particularly enthusiastic decomposer that could break down anything organic given sufficient moisture and poor judgment. However it occurred, the crew woke on day 43 to discover that their entire supply of nutrition blocks, precisely calculated to last 90 days, had transformed overnight into something that resembled diseased pudding and smelled like a war crime. Commander Thorne stood in the storage bay, all four arms crossed in a configuration that communicated profound displeasure. The nutrition blocks, once compressed cubes of beige efficiency, had merged into a single pulsating mass of blue-gray sludge that occasionally burped clouds of spores into the air. The environmental sensors screamed warnings about toxicity levels. The mass appeared to be growing. "This is suboptimal," Thorne said, which was Quicks for "we're going to die." The crew gathered in the common area for an emergency meeting. 7 individuals representing 6 species, staring at each other with various configurations of eyes, sensory organs, and appendages, all arriving at the same conclusion: they were comprehensively screwed. "The resupply vessel isn't scheduled for another 47 days, Vess said, their fronds wilting in distress. "The emergency beacon will bring a rescue ship in approximately 48 hours, but that's 48 hours without food." Olm finished, their voice bubbling through the suit speakers. "Some of us have faster metabolisms than others." The Varan clicked in agitated harmony. Ticket's translation came through the comm system. 48 hours is survivable for most species present. Uncomfortable, but survivable. However, the psychological impact of unexpected resource scarcity may cause— "We get it," Thorne interrupted. "We're not going to starve, but we're going to be miserable and potentially impaired. Anyone have solutions?" Prax shifted, their crystalline structure refracting the overhead lights into rainbow patterns. "My species can synthesize basic nutrients from mineral compounds. I could attempt to process local geological samples into something biologically useful." They tried that first. Prax spent 3 hours in the geological lab, running chemical analyses and molecular reconstructions on various rock samples. The result was a grey powder that technically contained nutrients in the same way that technically a rock and a nutrition block were both made of atoms. When Vess analyzed it, their fronds turned an alarmed shade of yellow. "This would provide sustenance to a Thexari," Vess reported. "It would cause cascading organ failure in literally everyone else. The silicon content alone, not viable," Thorne said. "Next option." Olm proposed filtering microorganisms from the nearby swamp water. The Shindor had evolved to extract nutrition from aquatic microbiota, and surely some of Verdaxis 9's abundant microbial life would be safe for consumption. They spent 2 hours collecting samples, running them through analysis, and discovering that roughly 95% of the local microorganisms produced neurotoxins, hallucinogens, or both. The remaining 5% are safe, Olm admitted, but the caloric yield would require processing approximately 4,000 liters per individual per day. And there's a non-zero chance of accidentally consuming the hallucinogenic varieties, which I'm told is undesirable during professional expeditions. "Extremely undesirable," Thorne confirmed. The Varan suggested entering torpor, a metabolic state their species could achieve that dramatically reduced nutritional requirements. Unfortunately, this adaptation was uniquely insectoid. The mammals would simply fall unconscious and wake up hungrier. The Quicks would become aggressive and irrational. Prax didn't technically eat in the conventional sense anyway, and Vess could photosynthesize but would become increasingly listless without supplementary nutrients. 6 hours into the crisis, the crew had exhausted conventional options. They sat in the common area, the mood declining from concerned to quietly desperate. The emergency beacon had been activated. Rescue was coming. They just had to survive 48 hours without food, maintain equipment, and not descend into the kind of resource-driven interpersonal conflicts that made excellent cautionary tales in IBSC training modules. That's when Dietrich spoke up. "I could cook something," he said. The common area fell silent. 6 species turned various sensory organs toward the human. Dietrich sat in the corner where he'd been quietly observing the mounting chaos, his expression mild, his tone suggesting he'd just offered to recalibrate a malfunctioning sensor array rather than propose something apparently insane. "Explain," Thorne said carefully. Dietrich shrugged. Verdaxis 9 has a functional ecosystem. That means energy transfer through trophic levels. There's biomass out there, plants, fungi, probably some mobile organisms. Some of it will be edible with proper preparation. I can gather ingredients, apply thermal processing, and produce something nutritionally viable. The crew stared. "You want to consume unprocessed biological matter from an unanalyzed alien ecosystem," Prax said slowly, their crystalline voice frequencies conveying disbelief. "Not unprocessed," Dietrich corrected. "That's what cooking is, processing through applied heat to break down cellular structures, denature proteins, neutralize certain toxins, and improve digestibility." "Cooking," Ulm repeated, the word bubbling through their suit speakers like an accusation. "You're describing cooking. That's a primitive. It's a survival technique," Dietrich interrupted, still calm. "My species used it for roughly 2 million years before we developed industrial food processing. It works." Vess's fronds had gone completely pale. "You're proposing to apply open combustion to organic matter and then consume the results. That's not food preparation. That's what we do to biological waste before disposal. That's what happens during cremation ceremonies." "Also cooking," Dietrich agreed. "Look, I understand this seems unorthodox, but the alternative is 48 hours of increasing hunger, declining cognitive function, and potential medical emergencies if anyone's blood sugar drops too far. I can work with what's available. I've done it before." "When?" Thorne demanded. "Survey mission on Kelleris 6, 3 years ago. Ration shortage due to a shipping error. Kept a crew of 12 fed for a week on local ecosystem resources." "That's not in your file," Thorne said. "Didn't seem relevant during hiring. You asked if I could maintain life support systems under adverse conditions. I can. This is just a different application of the same principle, keeping people alive when the standard systems fail." The crew exchanged glances, silent communications passing between them. The concept was horrifying from multiple evolutionary perspectives. Most spacefaring species had long since divorced themselves from the messy reality of where food came from. Nutrition arrived in clean, compressed blocks formulated by scientists. The idea of going into a hostile environment, identifying edible biomass, and then applying fire to it until it became safe for consumption was several steps removed from civilized behavior. But desperation made philosophers of them all. "If you poison us," Thorne said finally, "I will personally ensure your employment termination is extremely unpleasant." "Understood," Dietrich said. "I'll need a few hours to survey the local area and identify safe options. And I'll need something to cook in, a metal container, preferably." "The sample collection drums," Vess suggested weakly. "We have several that are clean and heat-resistant." "Perfect." Dietrich stood, stretching. "I'll be back before dark. Try not to panic." He left the common area with the casual confidence of someone heading out for a routine supply run, rather than into a jungle that had tried to kill them daily for 6 weeks. The crew watched through the external cameras as Dietrich ventured into Verdaxis 9's green nightmare. He'd equipped himself with basic tools, a cutting implement, collection bags, the portable scanner usually used for geological samples. He wore standard protective gear but moved through the undergrowth with unsettling ease, navigating around the carnivorous moss patches and acid-spitting vines that had plagued their survey work. "What is he doing?" Ulm asked, watching the human kneel beside something that resembled a boulder covered in purple fungus. "Scanning it," Prax observed, checking the chemical composition. Dietrich's scanner beeped. He nodded to himself, produced the cutting tool, and carved away several chunks of the fungus, depositing them in a collection bag. He moved on to what appeared to be a root system emerging from the swamp, thick, pale tubers that secreted a clear fluid the crew recognized as mildly acidic. Dietrich scanned them, consulted his handheld datapad, then began excavating, pulling up tubers the size of his forearm. "Those are toxic," Vess said. "We catalogued them last week. Direct contact causes chemical burns." "He's wearing gloves," Ticket clicked. "And he appears to be selecting specific specimens based on scanner data." For 2 hours, they watched Dietrich move through the jungle like he was shopping at a market rather than surrounded by botanical hostility. He collected bulbous fruits that exploded when dropped. He dug up roots that writhed when exposed to air. He captured several small creatures that resembled 6-legged salamanders and made sounds like distressed machinery. When he returned to camp, his collection bags bulged with what looked like evidence from a crime scene against nature. He dumped the contents onto a clean workspace, sorting through them with the focused attention of someone performing delicate surgery. "Right," he said to the assembled crew, who were watching him with the horrified fascination usually reserved for impending disasters. "I scanned everything for toxic compounds, heavy metals, and obvious allergens. Cross-referenced with the biological database for known hazardous molecules. This stuff is safe, or will be after proper preparation. That fruit exploded when we tried to collect it yesterday," Chax pointed out. "Pressure-sensitive external membrane," Dietrich explained, carefully cutting into one of the bulbous fruits with a blade. "The interior is stable, high in carbohydrates, decent sugar content. These tubers are acidic raw, but the acid breaks down at approximately 90 degrees Celsius. The fungus is actually pretty nutritious, protein and complex carbohydrates. And these little guys," he held up one of the salamander creatures which had stopped moving, "are analogous to what my species would call protein. Muscle tissue, minimal toxins, should be fine once cooked." Vess looked like they might photosynthesize themselves into unconsciousness. "Now I need to build a fire," Dietrich continued. "Absolutely not," Thorne said immediately. "Open combustion is prohibited in camp. Fire safety protocols can be temporarily suspended given that we're facing a survival situation." Dietrich interrupted. "I'll build it outside, away from the habitat modules, in a controlled pit. I'm not going to burn down the camp." "Your confidence is not reassuring," Ulm muttered. But they were desperate enough to allow it. Dietrich constructed a pit outside the main habitat, lining it with rocks from the geological samples. Prax confirmed they wouldn't explode when heated, which apparently was a concern. He gathered dried plant material from the less aggressively hostile vegetation, arranged it carefully, and then did something that made several crew members recoil in instinctive fear. He created fire, not from a plasma torch or electrical ignition or any civilized heat source. He used friction, a primitive technique involving wood and persistence that produced smoke, then sparks, then small flames that he carefully nurtured into a proper fire. The crew watched from inside the habitat as flames danced in the pit. Fire was dangerous. Fire was uncontrolled energy release. Fire was what happened during ship malfunctions and industrial accidents. Most species had evolved past the need for open combustion, relegating it to emergency scenarios and historical reenactments. But Dietrich sat beside his fire pit like it was a friendly companion, feeding it additional fuel, adjusting the arrangement to control the heat output. He'd filled one of the sample collection drums with water from the purification system and suspended it over the flames using an improvised framework of metal supports. "He's boiling water," Prax observed. "That's actually sensible. Additional sterilization." Dietrich began preparing his collected ingredients with methodical precision. The tubers were scrubbed clean, their acidic coating rinsed away, then cut into chunks. The fungus was trimmed and sectioned. The fruits were carefully opened and their interior flesh extracted. The salamander creatures were processed in a way that several crew members chose not to watch, yielding cuts of pale tissue. Everything went into the drum. Dietrich added what he identified as local plant matter, leaves and stems that the scanner confirmed contained compounds analogous to what humans called herbs. The water began to bubble. Steam rose into Verdaxis 9's humid air. Smells began to drift toward the habitat, complex organic compounds breaking down under thermal stress, chemical reactions producing volatile aromatics that registered on various species' sensory organs as everything from warning possible combustion hazard to something else. Something the crew didn't have context for. "That smell," Vess said quietly. "What is that?" "Cooking," Dietrich called out, apparently having overheard through the external audio pickups. Maillard reaction, protein denaturation, caramelization of sugars, release of aromatic compounds from the herbs. That's what food smells like when you prepare it from actual ingredients instead of compressing nutrients into shelf-stable blocks. He stirred the contents of the drum with a long implement, occasionally leaning down to smell the rising steam, adding pinches of additional plant matter, adjusting the position of the drum to control the heat. The process took nearly an hour. The crew watched in silence, their various biologies sending confused signals about whether this was dangerous, disgusting, or something else entirely. Finally, Dietrich lifted the drum away from the fire. He used a smaller container to scoop out a portion of the contents, a thick mixture of the various ingredients, now transformed by heat into something that resembled stew more than it resembled its component parts. "Right," he said. "Taste test. I'll go first, obviously. If I'm wrong about the toxicity, you'll know in about 15 minutes when I start convulsing." "That's not comforting," Olm said. Dietrich ate a portion, chewing slowly, swallowing, waiting. The crew watched him like he was a chemical experiment that might explode. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Dietrich remained conscious, non-convulsive, and apparently satisfied. "Safe," he announced. "Anyone hungry?" Nobody moved immediately. The psychological barrier was significant. This wasn't food as they understood it. This was biomass from an alien jungle, thermally processed using open flames, prepared without scientific facilities or proper testing protocols. Chax clicked softly. "I will attempt consumption. My species has robust digestive systems. If it's going to cause problems, I'm most likely to survive them." The Varan approached the fire pit with visible trepidation. Dietrich served a portion into a clean container. Chax extended a manipulator appendage, extracted a small amount, and consumed it through their feeding aperture. The crew waited. Chax's antenna twitched, Their compound eyes reflected the firelight. They clicked rapidly, surprised, confused, then something else. Not unpleasant. The translation came through. The texture is irregular. The flavor profile is complex, multiple compounds interacting, some bitter, some sweet, some registering as umami analogues. It's warm. I've never consumed warm food before. This is extremely strange. Strange bad or strange interesting? Dietrich asked. Strange. Interesting. Chax admitted. I would consume more. That broke the dam. One by one, the crew members approached. Thorn went next, motivated by command responsibility. Then Prax, who didn't technically need to eat, but was scientifically curious. Vess followed, their fronds regaining some color. All required a modified serving that could be integrated into their suit's feeding system. Even Ticket, initially the most resistant, eventually accepted a portion. The response was unanimous. If reluctant, the stew was edible, more than edible. It was actually satisfying in ways that nutrition blocks had never been. The warmth, the complexity of flavors, the varied textures, the simple fact that it was food they could see being prepared rather than extruded from industrial processes. It engaged sensory systems that compressed nutrients had never activated. They gathered around the fire pit as the sun set over Verdaxis 9, consuming portions of thermally processed jungle biomass, and discovered something most spacefaring species had forgotten. Eating could be more than fuel intake. It could be an experience. Dietrich prepared meals twice daily for the next 48 hours. Breakfast involved the fruit flesh, combined with a grain-like seed he'd found on some of the local grasses, cooked into a porridge-like substance that provided sustained energy. Dinner was variations on the stew theme, incorporating different ingredients as he identified them. A type of aquatic plant that added depth to the broth, additional protein sources, tubers with different flavor profiles. The crew adapted faster than anyone expected. The twice-daily gatherings around the fire became ritualized. Dietrich would prepare the food while crew members completed their necessary tasks. Then everyone would assemble, collect their portions, and eat together. Conversations happened. Stories were shared. Ticket explained Veren's social structures. Olm described their homeworld's bioluminescent oceans. Prax discussed crystalline growth patterns with surprising poetry. Thorn, watching this unfold, recognized something the IBSC training modules had mentioned, but never quite captured. Shared meals created social cohesion in ways that mission briefings and team-building exercises couldn't replicate. On the second night, Vess asked Dietrich about the preparation process. The human, never one to refuse teaching opportunities, explained the basics: heat application, timing, flavor combinations, the chemistry of cooking. Vess took notes. Prax asked questions about optimal temperatures for different protein structures. Even Olm inquired whether aquatic ingredients might be incorporated differently. You're teaching them to cook, Thorn observed, all four arms crossed, but their tone more bemused than critical. Knowledge transfer, Dietrich replied, stirring the evening stew, might be useful someday. Besides, cooking isn't complicated once you understand the principles. Heat plus time plus ingredients equals food. Everything else is refinement. The rescue vessel arrived exactly on schedule, descending through Verdaxis 9's atmosphere with the precise navigation that characterized IBSC operations. The pilot, a veteran of 47 extraction missions, expected to find a crew in various states of distress, hungry, uncomfortable, eager to leave. Instead, the landing sensors detected an open combustion source outside the habitat. The atmospheric analysis showed complex organic compounds associated with prepared food. The external cameras revealed 7 individuals gathered around a fire pit, consuming what appeared to be a meal, engaged in animated conversation. The pilot contacted Commander Thorne directly. "This is Rescue Vessel Meridian. We're in position for extraction. Is there an emergency situation requiring immediate evacuation?" Thorne looked around at the crew, at Dietrich serving final portions of stew, at the fire crackling cheerfully in defiance of standard safety protocols. "Negative, Meridian. The emergency has been resolved. We're ready for standard extraction procedures. No medical interventions required." "Understood. Stand by for..." "Wait, is that an open fire?" "Long story," Thorne said. "We'll file a full report. It involves fungal contamination, resource scarcity, and creative problem solving. Our atmospheric sensors are detecting..." "Dinner," Thorne interrupted. "You're detecting dinner." The extraction proceeded smoothly. The crew packed their equipment, collected their samples, and prepared to leave Verdaxis 9 to its hostile botanical endeavors. Dietrich dismantled the fire pit, scattering the stones and ensuring no combustible materials remained. The spot where they'd gathered for 2 days was returned to jungle, leaving no evidence except some disturbed soil and a few scorch marks. As the rescue vessel lifted off, carrying 7 individuals who were well fed and in considerably better spirits than anticipated, the pilot filed a mission report that would circulate through IBSC administrative channels for months afterward. It contained phrases like unconventional resource utilization, primitive but effective sustenance techniques, and recommend updating emergency protocols to include basic thermal food preparation training. Commander Thorne filed their own report, more detailed, including Dietrich's complete methodology, chemical analyses of the consumed ingredients, and physiological monitoring data, proving that thermally processed local biomass could indeed sustain multiple species without adverse effects. The report concluded with a recommendation that field technician Dietrich Kovac receive commendation for creative problem-solving under resource-constrained conditions. Dietrich filed the shortest report, as was his nature: ration contamination event, resolved through application of established human survival techniques. No crew injuries, mission objectives unaffected, standard extraction completed on schedule. He didn't mention teaching xenobiologists to cook. He didn't mention the nightly gatherings around the fire, the conversations, the moment when Vess admitted they'd never considered that food preparation could be a social activity rather than just a biological necessity. He didn't mention Chaks requesting copies of the recipes, though calling them that was generous given they were mostly notes like tubers boiled until soft, add herbs to taste. Those details seemed personal somehow, not relevant to the official record. But 3 months later, when Dietrich received his next assignment, a geological survey on an ice moon where the average temperature would make nitrogen weep, he found a package waiting in his quarters. Inside was a portable thermal cooking unit, compact and efficient, designed to operate in low-oxygen environments. The attached note, written in 4-armed quick script, read simply, "In case the rations fail again, don't burn down the camp. Thorne." Tucked beneath it was a smaller note, in crystalline etching from Prax: "Recommended temperature for mineral-based broths, 140 degrees Celsius. I've been experimenting." And a waterproof data chip from OLUM, Aquatic Ingredient Preparation Techniques. Some of these are actually palatable, and a carefully folded piece of fiber paper from Vess, containing drawings of Verdaxis 9 herbs, with notes about flavor profiles and nutritional content. The Varen had sent a joint message, clicking enthusiastically through an audio file: We attempted to recreate the stew in the station cafeteria. Results were mixed. The staff requested we stop. We did not stop. Thank you for the knowledge. Dietrich smiled, filed the notes carefully, and packed the thermal cooking unit in his equipment locker. The galaxy, for all its technological sophistication and scientific advancement, still hadn't quite figured out that survival wasn't just about having the right equipment. Sometimes it was about knowing what to do when the equipment failed, when the carefully calculated plans dissolved into chaos, when all you had was hostile jungle and the willingness to apply fire to things until they became dinner. Humans had spent millennia learning that lesson. The rest of the galaxy was slowly catching up, one improvised meal at a time. And somewhere in the IBSC administrative archives, buried among thousands of routine mission reports, was a notation that would puzzle future researchers. Recommend all long-duration expeditions include at least one crew member familiar with primitive sustenance techniques, particularly those involving thermal processing of raw biomass. Unlikely to be needed, but catastrophic if needed and unavailable. It was the closest the Interstellar Botanical Survey Corps would come to officially acknowledging that sometimes, when civilizations' carefully constructed systems failed, the answer wasn't more technology. Sometimes the answer was just a human, a fire, and the knowledge of how to turn a hostile jungle into dinner.